Twitter. Tonight we're very happy to have with us Cecilia Rodriguez Milanes and Oye, What I'm Going to Tell You. But to give her the proper introduction that she deserves, please welcome her friend and colleague, the author of Sugar Island. Please welcome Yvonne Lamazeres.
Thank you so much for coming, and I am just honored and privileged and just a great pleasure to present to you tonight's author, Cecilia Rodriguez Milanes. I had the very good fortune of meeting Cecilia when we were both in our 20s in college, when we were both starting to admit to ourselves and maybe to a couple other people that we wanted to write. And Cecilia was way ahead of me. She was way ahead of me in admitting it and in living this truth in her life so successfully. Cecilia is an accomplished, courageous, and brilliant storyteller whose passion is to chronicle the lives of Cuban Americans, of Cubans in Cuba, and of Latinos in the United States. Cecilia was born in Jersey City to Cuban parents and later went to high school and to college here in Miami, where we met. She has published the short story collection Marielitos, Barcelos, and Other Exiles. She published that in 2009, and it's available here in the store. She also published the poetry collection Everyday Chica in 2010. And her new collection that we're going to hear from today, Oye, What I'm Going to Tell You, Kirkus Reviews calls these stories high-wire balancing acts, a blend of sorrow, wit, and loveliness, and the kind of real that catches in a reader's throat. Oye, What I'm Going to Tell You was also recognized, along with Marielitos, Barcelos, and Other Exiles, in England's The Guardian's list of the top 10 books today to understand Cuba. So please help me welcome Cecilia Rodriguez Milanes.
Thank you. You're going to make me cry. Thank you so much for coming. I am so pleased to be here. I also wanted to say that for those of you who bought books, I have a little gift for you. This is my daughter. It's not me. You know, I think that I became a writer because I really love listening to stories. I was not a reader. I was not one of those kids that, you know, would stay indoors and read and read and read. I really wanted to be outside and play with my friends and just hang out. And I grew up in a community of many different people from all over the world, not just all over Latin America and the Americas, but also from all over Europe. And so everybody was hyphenated, Italian American, Irish American, Polish American, besides the Dominican Americans and Mexican Americans and Cuban Americans. So I liked listening to the stories about how they came to the United States. I always just found that really fascinating. So I was allowed to sit and listen to the conversations because, of course, I had nothing to contribute. I could just listen. So I think that the other reason that I became a writer is because I left where I grew up in New Jersey. And it was very traumatizing for a 14-year-old, as you can imagine. And I didn't want to be in Miami. I wanted to be in, I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to go to the only high school in my town. But I decided that I would write letters to my friends and, said, please tell me what's going on. Who's hanging out with who and who's dating who and, what happened to that kid. And, I was writing letters, but guess what? Nobody wrote back. So I think that it was a kind of a solace for me to write these letters because it kind of helped me. It's like kind of therapy, right? Please come in. There's chairs right up front. And I think I kind of got the hang of it. And I didn't realize that I was good at it until, of course, a teacher said, you wrote a really great essay. And I was like, really? Oh, okay. And then this was a teacher at North Miami Beach High School. And I graduated early because I hated high school. I wanted to go to Miami High where my husband went and hang out with all the cool dudes in Miami. But my high school was not very diverse and not much fun. So I wanted to get out, and I graduated early. And I was going to go work full-time in an insurance company. And when my high school teacher, my English teacher said, you're not going to go to college? I said, yeah, I'm going to go to college, but not right away. She was like, no, you have to go to college. I said, yes, I know. I'm going to go to college. I'm just going to work for a few months. So it was never a question that I wasn't going to go. It's just that I worked full-time for a few months before I went. And I went to Miami-Dade North, and I loved it. it was so liberating. I really finally felt like an adult. And this was, at the height of disco era. And all the cool tipos would sit on the wall, and, they would be checking you out as you pass by. And everybody would be looking at each other and, sizing each other up. And then you would see them in the discotheques on the weekend. So it was a great time. It was wonderful. And then, of course, I said to my mother, I want to be a writer. I want to study writing. And guess what? The only place in Miami is at the University of Miami. And she's like, what? The University of Miami? That's like the most expensive place. FIU, this is 100 years ago, did not have the first 2 years. You could only do your junior and senior year in FIU. So you remember that, right?
One building.
One building. So I had a bunch of grants. I had good grades, and I actually got to study creative writing at the University of Miami. And I was fully intending to get a Master of Fine Arts at Iowa because they said Iowa was the best school. And of course, 800 people applied to Iowa, and I didn't get accepted. And I was devastated because I didn't have a plan B. I had a plan B, but it was only like, oh yeah, if I don't get, I'm going to Iowa. If I don't get out of Iowa, I'll go to Columbia. Guess what? I didn't get to Columbia either. And I had another school in New York, and I didn't get into that. It was devastating. I went to work full time, and before the year was out, I was back at school. And I went to Barry University where Yvonne and I met. And we wanted to write. And we would have little writing workshops, and we would try to share. And then we thought, we're going to write this thing together. So we were always talking about what plans we had for writing. But it took a long time for us to get those books out. It was a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice. And I found that I really liked telling stories. I liked to be able to get into a character's mind and tell just a sort of a snapshot of a life or a day or something important. And so the first book that it's out there, Marielitos, Barcelos, and Other Exiles, there are several stories that take place in the 1980s in Miami during the Mariel, influx. But then there's also stories that take place in the 90s during the special period when a lot of Cubans came in 1995. So we call those the Barcelos, right? And all those stories are set in Florida. But then I thought, Miami is not the only place where Cubans live. Of course, I lived in New Jersey, and there were lots of Cubans there. So I thought, I need to have a collection that has to do with, New Jersey Cubans, right? And Cubans in North Carolina, and maybe Oklahoma, right? So I put a bunch of stories together, and I said, and because these kids grew up in New Jersey, they don't sound like the kids that grew up in Miami. And they curse a lot because people in New Jersey curse a lot, and Cubans curse a lot too, so I just a word to the wise here. So I think I know almost everybody in the audience. I just want to thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. It's just, it does my heart good. So I want to read a story called The Law of Progress, and I'll tell you the story about the story. My mother is always giving me great ideas. Mi mamá, Isabel Rodriguez, is not here because she lives near me in Poinciana. She would be here. She would totally be here. But she's going to go to my readings in New York. I have 3 readings in New York, so she's going to go with me to New York. She always says the craziest stuff, and I think it's so funny. So somebody we know was dating a Haitian, and she said, she's not going to mejorar la raza. If she goes with that guy, she's not going to go forward. She's not going to progress the race, right? Because that's about racial uplift, but not in the African-American sense. Because in the African-American sense, racial uplift is about education. It's not about skin color. But for Cubans and lots of Caribbeans, it's about light skin, keeping lighter and lighter and lighter, right? So she said to me, there's la ley del atavismo. And I was like, what is that? She says, it's about racial uplift and how who you mate with and determining how light your children will be. I was like, you can't, you're lying. That can't be so. So I just thought, that's really funny. So it actually has to do with animals, but in her mind, it was it has to do with people too. So the La Ley del Atavismo translates to the law of progress. So in this story, there's a Cuban girl who's going out with a Haitian dude. And she's afraid to bring him home, but she does anyway, and all kinds of problems happen, as you can imagine. So I'm going to try to tone it down a little. There are a few F-bombs and a few other spicy words. But I know there's kids in the audience, so I'll try to. So every time you hear me say freaking, it's because it's not freaking. The law of progress. My mother's mother said it took 4 generations to get the blackout. I'm the 4th generation, so who I mate with will determine if our family racially advances or goes back. Atraso. That's what mommy says whenever she sees light-skinned people with their black folks and mixed swirl babies. And get this, she swears it was a law in Cuba. For real. Abuela called it la ley del atavismo. You can't make crap like that up. If only she knew I'm dating a Haitian dude. Not even 15 freaking generations will get that blackout. Good thing Abuela's dead. The shock of seeing her muñequita con ese negro tinto would kill her for sure. She's probably rolling in her grave all the way back to Cienfuegos, where her family's from. I could just hear her now. We left Cuba so you would never have to struggle. And what do? Go with Haitiano. Dios mío, you don't know what you're going to endure. Don't you know how your children are going to suffer? Abuela was hardcore and never held back. One time when I was 10 and playing jacks out front with Shelly and Lisa, the sisters from across the street, their mom and dad were teachers, for Christ's sake. So Abuela's looking out the window and she starts hollering. Niña, ¿qué tú haces con esas negritas? Hazme favor de entrar ahora mismo. What'd she say? Lisa was the smartest girl in the 5th grade, and Shelly had already skipped a grade. I was so scared they'd understand, I started yelling back and causing a ruckus. Abuela, ¿qué te pasa? I swear to God, ¿por qué tú dices eso? I can't believe this. What'd she say? I swear to God. What the hell she say? Shelly was poking me, even though she was younger. She better not be saying nothing about us. Boy, Abuela, ya. I'm coming. I gotta go. The sisters were giving me the evil eye, and I was breathing hard. I grabbed up the jacks and flew up the stairs without looking back. Abuela was still talking shit, but thank God it was in Spanish. I miss her, but not her crazy-ass backwards thinking. For sure, Mommy's not going to be pleased about Vital. After all, she's Abuela's spawn. But Papi's hard to figure. Who knows what Papi's liable to do? Just hope he doesn't put me out. We'll see. My sister Nellie, who's only 14 months younger than me, laughed her ass off when I told her I was going to bring Vital home. Girl, have you lost your mind? She advised me to keep him to myself. She can say shit like that because she's a lesbian and no man will ever spoil Papi's little girl. Bitch doesn't even give a hard time from our parents when she came out. Mommy was all crying and shaking her head. She didn't cuss her or disown her or anything. And what came out of Papi's mouth, I just can't believe it. And he made her run over to her and hug him tight. Something about how Guajiros always say that a woman that goes with a woman first will never go with a man. You believe that? Now she is the apple of his eye, always treating her tender like she's so frail or something. But truth is, she's getting over on them. At least I think so. She quit her senior year, saying she was so traumatized, pobrecita. Started working in a bike shop on the boulevard for her girlfriend, who's older by 20 years. Papi and Mommy sure don't know that part. And Nellie doesn't even pay rent or give money for food or nothing. Me, I pay for my own car. Granted, it's a piece of crap, but it rolls. And I'm going to school days at Jersey State and work nights and weekends at Bonus Office Warehouse on Route 441. I started giving my parents half my paycheck when Bobby got laid off. Mommy says I shouldn't, and they'll pay me back when Bobby gets back to full time, but I said no. I pay my cell, my school stuff, the car insurance, clothes, all the incidentals. I'm so glad to have my own room and not have to worry about doing laundry, cooking, or buying groceries. I hate the thought of all that necessary but boring work. My goal in life is to have enough money to pay someone else to do that crap for me. I'm not even thinking marriage or kids, just starting a business where I reap what I sow. That's what Papi always put in my head from when I was little. Hija, he said, in this country you can be your own boss. I don't have the language or the years, so I have to work for someone else. Pero you can accomplish anything. Work hard and nothing can stop you. You hear me? It's not like Vital is the first black guy I ever dated, but I guess the others didn't count because I never told my family. I knew it was more trouble than it would be worth, and none of them were candidates for meeting the family anyway. Mommy liked it when I brought home the pale-eyed Polak or otherwise nondescript, unethnic Americanos. Funny how blacks aren't considered Americanos to them, as if to be American you gotta be white. And of course, we're not Americanos either. Now that's what I call atraso. I've waited 5 months, 2 months before I even let Vital touch me, though I really wanted him to. It's not even that he's so fine. He's kind of skinny, but he has the most amazing smile. Maybe his teeth are so white because he's so freaking dark, and even in the bright sunlight, his smile dazzles. And his face changes, and it changes me, draws me in. Mami'd say that his face is llamativo. She'd say that maybe if she gave him half a chance. Vital's old school, no tats or earrings. Shit, his hair is even shaved down close to his beautifully formed head. No facial hair, no baggy clothes, and oh my God, he's Catholic. If he weren't so dark, I'm sure my family would love him. Love him like I want to love him. It's gotta be love. Why else would I risk it all by bringing him home? He's so respectful of me. Calls me when he says he's gonna call, shows when he says he's gonna be there. Dude is a dreamboat. I called him that. He was like, what? Dreamboat. You know what that means? We'd already had sex a couple of times and I was feeling high from skin and sweat and slick sweetness. What is this? He blinked his sleepy, almond-shaped eyes and slid his hand over my cheek. It's like, oh hell, I don't know how to explain it. Someone who's like perfect, the perfect guy. He just grinned. He didn't tease me either, but leaned over to plant a big old wet one. Then he put my face in his hands and said something even I understood. Je t'aime, mamacita. I had to laugh at that because at that time, we were walking on campus one time. One of the hood rats who thinks he's all that, trying to get my attention, said, ay, mamacita, dame un pedacito, which made me turn my head and laugh in his face, which led to him saying, bitch, why you do me like that? Which led to Vital, who's not built but impressive because he's tall, getting up in the dude's face till he backed down. I guess if his boys were around, it might have turned ugly. But right now, I have this great guy, black like a nasabache, telling me he loves me in freaking French, no less. What am I supposed to do? So I repeat, but add my own twist. Te quiero, papi chulo. And we both bust out laughing. So we are going on doing our thing for a few more months. All good, and soon enough, it's Thanksgiving. Thanks freaking giving. Should have thought that one through. After all, Nellie doesn't bring her lady friend to the house. As far as they know, she's a virgin and will always be one. I'd asked Mommy if I could bring a friend, un amigo, from school, who doesn't have his family here and who was alone for the holiday. And as soon as I said that, she gets all sentimental. Ay, pobrecito, sí, tráelo, invite him. Vital was a little worried, but I was all happy because Mommy had said yes. Of course, I said friend, not boyfriend. Your mother? She's okay with me going? He raised his eyebrows and the skin on his usually serene forehead folded into three. Yeah, she's cool. I said I was going to bring a male friend. So you didn't clarify that we're dating? No, not yet. I think it's best to take it slow. Once they meet how wonderful you are, they'll accept you. Accept me for what? Like, accept you to be my boyfriend. I was starting to get a little nervous, and Vital was still frowning and had narrowed his eyes. I'm not sure this is a good idea. Nah, don't worry. It'll be all right. You're just a friend who goes to school with me, who's all along for the holiday. And even as I said it, it sounded like a stupid made-up story, like so many lies I had perpetrated on my parents. That I was sleeping over my best friend Yvette's, the nights I was with Vital, or any of the other tipos I was getting with. Or going back to high school when I was ditching school and going to the city and just eating crap all day at the mall. Or that the smoke on my clothes was from all the workers in the warehouse where it was still legal. Mommy nailed me when she found a crumpled pack in my hoodie jacket. Or any of the other times when I didn't have to lie but felt like it because I just didn't want to tell them where I was going or what I was going to do, even when it was harmless. It all came to a head on Thanksgiving. Mommy's sister Julia and her family, all 8 of them, always came because even though their house is bigger, we had the biggest table and enough chairs and parking on the side. Tia and Tio's mother, their 3 young brats, and their oldest Yalisa, who's Nellie's age, with her baby. The baby daddy is MIA. As soon as she got pregnant, he fit perfectly into the desgraciado role. No one could even mention his name, even though Yalisa named the baby after him, so he will always and forever be Junior. No one from Papi's side ever came. His family stayed in El Campo, in Cuba. He was the only one who left our little town near the city of Remedios in Las Villas. It's not called that anymore. Papi said that after the revolution, Fidel divided up the island into a bunch of provinces that didn't make any sense. Before, Santa Clara was the province next to Las Villas, but now his town is in Villa Clara. Once Papi started talking about Castro and the stinking revolution, it was hard to shut him up. He accused his 5 brothers and sisters of being communists for staying. Papi was the only one who had gone all the way to the capital and gotten himself on a boat in El Mariel. And even though Papi's a Guajiro who loves his plants and natures and everything, he wasn't allowed to stay in Miami because there were so many of them. He and 40 other unsponsored guys were bused to Jersey, where he and Mommy met in a factory. Thank God he didn't stay in Florida, or we'd be hicks like my cousins in Hialeah. Talk about atraso. One time we drove down there to see Tío Saúl, Mommy's brother, and his family, staying with them for almost the whole summer. They wanted to check it out to see about moving. I couldn't believe how a city in Florida, which I thought was a jungle, could look like a city in Jersey, but without sidewalks or places to hang out except for a boring mall without any decent stores. I didn't mind sharing a room with Nellie and the cousins because we were older and cooler and told them all kinds of nonsense, like where babies came from and why penises were sometimes flat and other times sticking up and that they spit stuff out that looked like Ivory dishwashing detergent. Hialeah was all we ever saw that summer, and it was ugly, hot, humid, full of mosquitoes, and enormous, I mean freakishly huge, freaking flying roaches. Me and Nellie begged our parents to please, 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 never, ever, ever even consider moving there. I'm sure Papi was sad he wouldn't get to cultivate his mamey or mango or aguacate or whatever, but luckily for us it didn't happen. Me and Nellie were ecstatic about the news they sat us down to hear. Niñas. Papi did all the talking for both of them. Our parents faced us as we sat in the back seat of our car, away from the relatives, including Abuela. It was the only place of privacy. Your mommy and I are trying really hard to make it work here, he said, and bit his lower lip. Nellie was banging her knees together real fast, so I pinched her to stop. I wanted us to move here, to La Florida, but there aren't any good jobs, and without jobs, we can't take the chance. He looked at Mommy to see if she had anything to add. And besides that, your papi and I wanted to buy a house. She smiled out of one side of her mouth. Abuela has a little money to help us, but she doesn't want to stay here. I was surprised to hear that, because Abuela was always talking about how much she missed her son and the twins, but hell, she was on our side for once. We know you girls didn't want to move, but you're still young and you would have adjusted quickly. New Jersey is all you know. It would have been an adventure, pero it's just not the right time. Right time? That made me keep my guard up to the end of every school year. I'd listen carefully to the talk of summer to catch wind of any plans on heading south, but it never happened. Thank God, the saints, and all the angels. Amen. Thanksgiving dinner at my house was a production because a regular every day was rice, beans, some kind of meat, picadillo, thin steaks, chicken, and every once in a while we'd have fish because Abuela liked fish. Nellie was charged with setting the table and I made the salad. Bobby always brought home a day-old Italian bread, and that was Mommy's dessert. Pretty simple meals. But Thanksgiving, Mommy made a big American roasted turkey and also turkey fricassee because Bobby thought turkey was too dry. I asked to make stuffing like I saw on TV, and she didn't know what it was, so I showed her the box in the store, and then we always had that. Gravy, 2 kinds of cranberry, American yams, and Cuban boniato, store-bought pumpkin and apple pies. Tia Julia always brought her famous moros y cristianos, black beans cooked with white rice. Tia had a running joke about how the whites, the cristianos, liked the Africanos, the Moors, a little too much, and we'd all laugh. But not tonight. And that was the beginning of the end of our happy Thanksgiving dinner. There was a racket, like always, because that's how we are. And any other day, I wouldn't have noticed, but today, it was like everyone was amplified. And I thought I should have warned Vital, who of course arrived right on time and wearing a nice dress shirt and jacket. He looked better than the rest of us put together. I made sure I was near the door so I could be the one to get it when he rang the bell. "Hi," I said, and looked back to see if anybody had followed me down the hall. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said, and gave me a bunch of orange, burgundy, and yellow flowers, and had another bunch left. His dazzling smile steadied me as he crossed over the threshold into Casa de Locos. "Everyone's here." I rubbed his arm and motioned for him to follow me. "Don't worry, we talk loud, but it's fast, so if you don't understand, give me a sign." Vital lifted 2 fingers, and I punched his shoulder, and then we were inside the big front room with the big table. Oye, familia, this is my friend Vital. It was just a split-second pause, but long enough for me to know. He said hello, but it was real low, and I think only me and Nellie, who was sitting at the end of the table, heard. Mommy walked over to him first. He handed her the other flowers, even bigger than my bunch, smiling that smile, and she smiled back and then lowered her head in a weird bow. Oh, thank you. Vital speaks French and Spanish. I rushed in before anyone said anything else. I wanted them to know that he'd understand if they started talking shit. Ah, that's good. Que bueno. Mommy's eyebrows lifted. Papi stood up and reached to shake Vital's hand. Hello, hello. Papi's big hand covered Vital's, shaking hard. Buenas noches, señor. Vital kept flashing that smile. Papi kept shaking his hand. Gracias por la invitación. Tia mumbled to Tío something in Spanish about who invited him. Mommy turned and gave her that don't go there look. Please, please, come, sit down. Papi steered him toward the end of the table, but Nellie jumped up. Oh no, come sit next to me. I'm her sister, the younger, smarter one. I didn't need any foolishness, especially not now. Very funny, Nellie, but he's going to sit next to me. I saved him a seat between me and Mom. I don't want these beautiful flowers to dry up. Excuse me. Mommy seemed in a hurry to get to the kitchen, and I felt like going after her, but my feet were stuck. So I put my flowers on the back of the couch. Go on then. Go sit with your guest. She took the flowers into the kitchen. I shot her a look as she passed me. Vital was pulling out a chair for me, and the rest of the family was looking, so I forced one foot in front of the other into my place. Tío reached over to shake Vital's hand. Hello, I'm Joaquin. He motioned to his left. My wife, Julia, her aunt. Then he motioned to his right. My mother, Lupe. Both of them nodded, weakly lifting a hand. Those little animalitos are our kids. Tío always called Brian, Quique, and Carlitos his animalitos, and they lived up to it. He stood to introduce his blameless princess, Yalisa, and my nietecito Junior. He lifted his hands, and the baby reached out his fat arms. Ay, que divino, Lupe said. I thought that maybe the baby would keep them entertained with his gurgling and rapid-fire raspberries. Nellie was already sitting, and Mommy easing into her chair with the papi at the head of the table. Then Vital said, what a beautiful baby. Where is the father? Nellie stifled a laugh, and I gasped. Tia turned to Tío and mumbled for him to walk the baby. Just go. Yalisa bit her lip. The animalitos giggled, and Lupe said, Ay, Dios mío. He's gone. Dead. Tia's angry frown confused Vital. I leaned over and whispered to the floor that he left my cousin. So sorry, lo siento. He tried to fix it, but it was too late. It was the longest, most miserable, most god-awful night. Nobody cracked jokes like we usually did, making fun of Papi's fricassee and all the carbs and the lonely, exquisite salad that I made that nobody ever touched. We ate fast, but without audibly savoring the meal. I missed Papi's oohing and eyeing over every single thing. Nobody asked Vital anything about Haiti or his family or what he was studying or if he liked the food. Nothing. He was the black elephant in the room, and I was the big pile of elephant shit. When it was time for dessert, Vital stood to pick up the plates. Por favor, quiero ayudar. No, don't. Mommy was a little too insistent. I bit the inside of my cheek and brushed away a hot tear that popped out. Nellie took the plates from the end of the table, and I took the ones from the front. Even Yalisa stood and helped with the forks and knives. You are a guest. You sit, Papi said, pointing at Vital. By now, I'm pretty sure everyone has figured Vital is more than my friend. By now, his smile has lost like 90% of its wattage, and I'm saying a prayer that we can get out of this without any more damage. Brian, Quique, and Carlitos were banging their now empty fists on the table and asking for pie, pie, pie. From out of nowhere, Tío appears and slapped two of them in the back of the head, causing them to ricochet, and then twice to get the other one, the unlucky one. The youngest one started bawling, and Tia reprimanded the kids and Tío while Lupe tried to calm them all. Yalisa rolled her eyes and said, here we go, and this set Tío off again, and he laid into her. What are you complaining about? Yalisa seemed genuinely surprised to see how annoyed he was when he lunged toward her and shook her shoulder. Go take care of your son. He's your responsibility. No one made a sound until Mommy came from the kitchen with 2 pies. She surveyed the room, placed the pies in front of Papi, and asked how many want café and how many want coffee. I'm responsible for the coffee, so I got to the work while Mommy violently packed the espresso down into the stainless steel basket of the coffee pot. My tongue felt like sandpaper, my head a bowling ball, and I could have kicked myself for thinking this all would have worked out. Mommy's giving me the silent treatment. Abuela would have been cursing me, my Haitian, and my mulatto nappy-headed brood by now, and I almost wish Mommy would say something. She's twisting the lid so hard the veins in her neck are rippling. I see no way out, no way to get Vital in, nothing but hardship, and I ask myself, why in the hell would this, us, work when all the evidence pointed to the disaster it became? I felt myself rehearsing the lie I'd perpetrate on him later, how we're too different, and that I planned on moving to the city with Yvette, that I was transferring to CUNY, how much I would miss his dazzling smile, how he's too good for me. Later, when he wants to soothe me to make it better, I'll cry. Thank you so much. I saw more friends and family come. Thank you so much. Hi, hi. So I think this is the part when you ask me questions, right? Oh, I know you guys are not shy. Somebody? Yes.
So you would interview them and then get their stories? Like how did it work? You interviewed a bunch of people? Would you just
Mix up.
Oh, okay, but it's from your experiences that you saw with other.
You have to be careful what you tell me, Carolina.
No one is asking.
Because it could end up in a story.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, just like, you know, my mother said that thing about la ley del atavismo, and I was like, oh my God, that's too good. I got to use that. In fact, there was another story, and there's a story in the collection called Poor and Unhappy. And you remember last summer when all of the Central American children were crossing the border unaccompanied. And we were watching TV, and she said, you know, it breaks my heart. It's terrible to see that. If I wasn't so old, I would take one of those children in. And I thought, oh, wow, that's too good. I got to use that. So that story has an older woman who's trying to trick her daughter into sponsoring one of those children. And, you know, in Spanish it would be pobre and felice, but of course, it doesn't translate very well in English. My editor was like, poor, unhappy? I'm like, yeah, okay, poor and unhappy. So we did it that way. Yeah, I just listen to people and make stuff up. Yes?
It's kind of a two-part question. The first is, when you started writing, how long did it really take you to get into your style? And in terms of like dialogue, how do you like jump back and forth? Because every character has like a very distinct dialogue that's very dynamic and real. So like, how do you just jump in, especially with the curse words? How do you know when to tone back and use more?
And there's little kids in the room. The girl in the story, the narrator, who doesn't have a name, my husband's like, how does she not have a name? She has to have a name. I'm like, she doesn't have a name. You can give her a name, whatever name you want to give her. She grew up in New Jersey, and people in New Jersey curse. That's their adjective. They use curse words to modify everything. And so I used to be like that. You can ask my friends. There's several of them here. But it's been a long time since I lived in New Jersey, so I don't curse as much. But it was true to the character. That's how the character talks. And that's the thing. I need to listen to how they talk, and sometimes I have to practice it. I have to hear it out loud. So sometimes it sounds enredado, it sounds like it's twisted, but remember that they're also speaking, like they have two languages, so sometimes the English sounds weird because their Spanish is kind of like, they have a different structure. So yeah, I think that also every story has its own style because every character has his or her own style. So like in this collection, there are two stories that take place in Cuba, and one takes place in the 40s, and it's two girlfriends, and they want to leave Cuba because they think it's too conservative for them. They want to be modern women like they see in the movies, right? Because of course all the movies, the US movies, they watch all the movies and they think, oh, I want to be like that. So in that story, the girls, like one of the girls, she's basically plotting to get the heck out of there. And the other one who gets left behind says, I'm going to go too. And then the other story is 1950 Cuba. And that one sort of has some little elements of truth because my aunt Julia married a Cantonese Chinese who came to Cuba in 1950. And I thought, what an interesting story. Like, what about his life? And I wasn't able to ask him a lot of questions because I only saw him briefly. And he actually lives in Cuba. He comes to visit his family here, but he lives in Cuba. And I had to do all the research. Like I read about the famine in China. I read about the war in China when the Japanese occupied China. I read about how many how many Chinese Cubans there were. They started coming in 1830. And there were thousands of them. And they had opera. And they had mutual aid societies. And they had banks. And they had 12 newspapers in Chinese, in Cantonese. So they were not just in Havana. They were throughout the island. So I did that research, and I have to tell you, like from that book that I read, I think it was Kathleen Gonzalez, and I think it's called Chinese Cubans. I used like one phrase, but I had to know all that stuff in order to know that character and where he was going, you know. So sometimes it requires research if it's not set in the time that you really know. But if it's contemporary, you know, everybody, you kind of know your environment. You have another part of that question? I think was it.
No, I just wrote on that.
Okay.
Are you ever concerned about being politically correct when you're writing?
I discovered that when I went to school in New York that I pissed off the liberals. And then in Miami, I pissed off the conservatives. So I thought, I'm good. I'm good. Tatiana, so nice to see you.
I just have a question about when you're writing something like short stories. And do you have them all in your head at the same time and then you sit down and do one? And then I have a two-part question. Do you know the end when you sit down and start writing, or do you let the story
Yeah, usually I have one story that's at the forefront. There might be other stories back here. Like right now I'm trying to decide what novel I'm going to work on. I have two that are very, you know, there's potential for both of them. And I'm just not sure which one I'm going to do. But usually when I'm working on a story, I sort of work it out in my head a lot. Like I try to figure out who the character is and like their backstory. I have to know what toothpaste they use. I have to know if they went to school. I have to know if they have siblings. I have to know all those things. And it might not appear in the story at all. But I need to know that before. And I let the characters and the story take me where I need to go. So I'm gonna out myself. I was reviewed in the New York Times this last weekend, and the reviewer said that some of the stories ended before they had to end. But it's like they ended where they needed to end for me. So he wanted, more. But to me, when I get to the end, I know, there's the end.
That's a compliment, though. You wanted more.
That's true.
Do you find that while you're preparing for the different stories that you're living a double life? You're thinking how your characters are thinking, but you're still living your own life, teaching and...
Yeah, they don't usually take up a lot of space in my head. Because I am very busy. I'm a full-time professor and have a very active family life. But like your brain is working even when you think you're not working. It's still working, so that when you get to the page, suddenly you go, oh, look at that. I didn't know that was there. It's really shaping at the point of utterance. When you finally get to the point where you put it out there, you discover. Writing is discovery, for sure.
I'm curious about your expectations versus the reality when you moved to Miami, and do you write stories about that?
Probably I will. In this collection, this young woman, she was happy not to have to go to Miami. There was a story in the first collection called My Dead, and in it, her family moves to Miami, and she's not very happy, but she gets a job, and that's a huge thing because it's like her own money and a sense of freedom that she can spend. So, even though she wasn't happy to be living in Miami, she was happy to have that kind of, maturity to have a job. I have to say, there's not a lot of biography in my stories. There's not a lot of my life in the stories. There's little pieces of people's lives. Like, for example, my husband's father didn't like turkey. So at Thanksgiving, they had fricassee. So I took that because we ate turkey in my house. My father may not have liked it, but he ate it. Hi, Michelle. Yes.
Well, since you got a mention of Hialeah, I was wondering if you had any appearances planned.
Maybe my friend who teaches at Hialeah will invite me.
You'll have to edit that part out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll read a different story. Absolutely. We don't want to offend the people from Hialeah.
I know you mentioned sometimes you get characters in your head and stories, and I know you also write poetry. What inspires you to write the poetry, and how do you know, like, when you get an idea or a feeling, an emotion, which one you're going to go to?
You know, I find that poetry is really very strong emotion. Like, I'm feeling something really, really strongly, and it's way more personal. I find that the poetry almost always has some personal, emotional connection to it. Even if it's not about me, I'm going through something, you know? And I think with stories, it's just, I'm interested in these characters. I want to know where they're going. I want to know what they're going to do. I want to, you know, like, I had a great writing instructor. She wasn't even my teacher, but I was working with her as her fellow at Breadloaf, Ann Hood. And she said the 3 questions for prose, for narrative, is, what if? Okay, so what if I put these characters in this situation? Then what? Now what happens, right? And then the most important question is, so what? Why should your reader care about that situation? So that to me is always like, okay, I'm going to put these characters in this thing, and then they're going to do something else, and then they're going to do something else, and at the end, why should we care about it? Right.
In your poetry, you are very deep and very classic English, perfectionist. It's different completely how you write this mix of Spanish and American. You are very, very classic English. You are English hires, and I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I think in some of them I do mix.
Most of them.
Yeah, like the Cuban American Manifesto that has some Spanish, I sing in it, you know, it's got a lot of stuff.
You have your style, this in some and some, but that's not really poetry, that's the same, but in verse.
And I think every story has its own style too. Like the stories that are set in the 40s and 50s, they don't have any slang. They don't, you know, it's more formal English. So to me, it's really, what does the story require? What does the poem require? So if the speaker is speaking formal English, she has a reason for it. It's not arbitrary, for sure.
No, but your poetry is hard for me to understand. The one that you send me one time, it's hard.
It shouldn't be. Poetry should be understandable.
No, because my English is not like yours. Yours is,
Well, my Spanish is not so good. My Spanish is not very good looking. Other questions? Really? You're not gonna yell at
you
me?
mentioned you're possibly writing a novel. And this is for when?
So, 2 of the stories in this collection, I think, have a lot of potential for a novel. And they're both of the ones that start in Cuba in the 40s and 50s. I was really, really interested in that time. And, you know, I liked doing the research about that time. You know, Cuba was neutral during World War II. What were they listening to? What was the music? You know, of course, my mother lived in Cuba, and I was, you know, and I've been to Cuba 3 times, so I know the streets where she walked and the places where she went. So I actually not only can imagine it, I actually know, you know, and I took thousands of pictures the last time I went. So I think place is also really important to me. So most of the stories, you should get a sense of place, right? Like I needed to imagine this girl's house. Like there was a front room and there was a hallway to get to her house, and there was a hall, there was like a side yard where they parked, and you know, the kitchen was behind this room. I needed to see it. You know, I have to map it out in my head so that when I'm writing it, I don't have to think about it. Yeah.
I don't know, how are we doing for time?
Thank you so much for coming. And like I said, this is a gift for the first 12 people who buy books. You get a free CD of poetry. This is my daughter on the cover. And it has all the poems from this collection and some music. And my husband, who sings, is on here too. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. For those of you watching online, don't forget, it's your last chance. Give us a call. We have both of Cecilia's books, Oye, What I'm Going to Tell You, and Marielito's, Barcelos, and Other Exiles. The books are for sale at the counter right up there. Cecilia will sit here and sign them for you. Stick around. We got some live music coming up at the courtyard, our great cafe. Have a good evening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.